Why do you want them to listen to your podcast?
So that when they think about starting a business, they've got the content that is pointing them in the right direction.
That is such a valuable piece of advice there.
The change in mindset makes a massive difference.
Welcome to Aussie Lawn Star.
Welcome to the podcast and the dungeon. How you doing, Steve?
Yeah, great. Thanks for bringing me on, mate.
I've been looking forward to this. I've been chasing you for a little while to get you in here, but, interviews take time to get secured.
Oh, especially when it's such a high-profile figure.
That's right. And people who don't know who you are, Steve Ween, you've been in LMCA for a few years. You have run your own business and you are currently not contracting, but you are consulting with work health safety.
Yeah, that's right. Around the time of COVID, I started up my lawn and garden care business, Chromo. Absolutely loved it. Like, I love being out in the garden, having an awesome lawn. And then, but I've had the work health and safety consulting running in the background since around that time as well.
Yeah, okay. And you are based in New South Wales at Wagga?
Yeah, down in Wagga. Sunny Wagga, as they say.
Sunny Wagga. Hot.
Hot, yes.
It's in the desert. I'm guessing in Wagga, if you don't irrigate, you don't have grass.
No, it's not that bad out here.
Not quite that bad.
You've got to go a little bit further out before it's an issue. We're pretty close to the Murrumbidgee River.
Now, I went out to Griffith in April this year, so around Easter time, and they irrigate. So if they want grass, they irrigate. And then I went back through Albury because my daughter lives in Albury, so stopped in there, and it's quite nice there.
Yeah, Albury's good. So today we didn't get any rain, but Albury's getting it. So it usually goes just south of us.
Yeah. And they're both on the Murrumbidgee?
Albury's on the Murray. So
on the Murray.
Yeah, we both towns sit between those two rivers, Murrumbidgee and Murray.
There you go. And Griffith had these signs up. I was just going back looking at that because I put out an episode earlier this week about catching up with Ben Giblett out at Griffith. They've got these signs up in Griffith, MIA, everywhere. And I'm like, who's missing in action?
Yeah, the Murrumbidgee irrigation area.
That's it.
Yeah.
So, everything there that wants to grow is part of the irrigation area.
Yep.
Yeah.
I do a fair bit of travel out that way, Leeton and Griffith, in my current job. So,
okay.
I was out there yesterday.
Yep. So you've got a full-time job as well as consulting on the side.
Yeah. So I've stepped into a full-time work health and safety role, and decided to keep the consulting business going because I've got so many lawn mowing contractors and pressure cleaning contractors that are chasing me for safety documentation. And
that's a good thing because in our industry, you've got a lot of contacts through LMCA. You've made a lot of friends there over the few years you've been involved there. But our industry, you will get every end of the spectrum when it comes to work health and safety. And we were talking about a couple of fresh cases that come up recently just before we started recording, but there is always going to be somebody sticking a finger or a foot or something where it doesn't belong.
Yeah. And look, it doesn't make me popular in my profession to say it, but sometimes accidents happen. However, there's the majority of accidents that happen are preventable. And that's what I'm all about is trying to make sure that we can, get guys and girls out there doing what they love and be able to keep doing that without being interrupted by an injury.
Many years ago, I did my chainsaw training with the SES and highly recommend anybody get involved with the SES or the Rural Fire Service if they need to do their chainsaw training or any other tickets that, volunteering, you get to contribute back to the community and you can get a ticket or two while you're at it. Yep. But I did the ticket. I knew everything to do in the book and then I went and used the chainsaw and broke every rule in the book. And as a result, I've got a very shark tooth looking injury on my left middle finger. And I'm lucky I've got my middle finger, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's the thing with work health and safety. There's a thing called the hierarchy of controls, and it talks about order of effectiveness. So what most people think is they go to training, they wear their PPE, and think that they'll be safe.
Yeah.
And the challenge with that is those are actually the two least effective controls to prevent an injury, because they rely on somebody actually wearing the PPE or following the training. So you've given a perfect example there, doing everything wrong. And we've all been guilty of it, myself included. Nobody's perfect.
So once you go from mowing residential lawns and doing cashies to running a business where you start to hold yourself accountable for not only your safety but other employees' safety, and commercial work sites where you've got some job requirements, you might come across a couple of documents that you need to have from time to time. I've seen JSAs and SWIMS documents come up as a request on many jobs that I've done.
Yep. So effectively, they're the same thing. JSA, or job safety analysis, is it's the old name for a SWIMS, and a SWIMS is a safe work method statement.
Yeah.
Now, these documents are basically risk assessments for high risk work.
Yep.
A SWIMS is supposed to be only for high risk construction work, but because they're so well known, a lot of people immediately just go, "Oh, I need a SWIMS." People who have a contract, they'll say, "Oh, I need a SWIMS." Real estate agencies will even do the same thing.
Yes.
At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you call it, as long as there's a risk assessment done and it's done properly, then that meets those requirements.
So what you're saying, the SWIMS documents actually came about as a result of high risk construction.
Yep. Yeah. So because they've got such a high number of incidents in that industry, they wanted a more thorough risk assessment. Made it a little bit easier for people in construction or working on construction sites to follow the processes and going, okay, from this step, I need to look at these are what might go wrong, and this is what I'm going to do to prevent that, and then following those through.
So if you were to push back against the legislative side of things and go, actually, when I'm doing work for a small business or a real estate agent, it's not actually a high risk construction site, I don't actually need a SWIMS document.
Yeah, and look, I have spoken with a number of contractors about that and said, look, please let them know that you don't need. And in a lot of cases, they say they want a risk assessment and a SWIMS, and I have to explain, that they're exactly the same document. I could create a risk assessment and a SWIMS that have exactly the same content in them. They just have a different name at the top of the document. So I do encourage contractors to have that conversation with whoever's requiring that of them, and say, look, I've got a risk assessment, and that's all that's actually required. And if the person that they're working for comes back and says, no, actually, I really want a SWIMS, well, we roll with that.
So we call the risk assessment a SWIMS.
Yep. Same. We just put a different name at the top.
At the end of the day, if they want it, even if it's not a requirement for that work level, it's still, if they want it, they can demand it.
That's right.
And that's not going to hurt you to do it.
No, that's right. And if you want the contract, that's something you're going to have to do. There's a lot of things that will be asked for when we go out for tender for a contract, or even just like a casual agreement with the real estate agent, or a local commercial or industrial site. They may not require by law to ask these things of us. However, that's part of getting the contract.
Yeah.
And as annoying as that can be, there's always a purpose for that. And we won't always see it on our end, but from the business perspective, that person we have the agreement with, they know the reason why. And you can always ask them if you want to know. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we get people their contracts.
Yeah. And ultimately, that's, your ability to work is, important. And if you're applying for contracts that are more than your typical residential backyard, there's some other commercial entity involved and you need to play ball with them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I've seen a couple of interesting things come up when it comes to a commercial entity that wants to swing a heavy weight around and pretend that they know what they're talking about. So I'm going to just refrain from labeling which bodies have done this because otherwise they might come back and bite me at some stage. But I've had several times where I've been requested to provide my license and registration. And when they ask for license and registration, I'm like, can you spell out what license and registration you're requiring? And I've given my driver's license and my car registration and they've accepted it.
Yeah, so what happens with a lot of those big organisations, and I'm assuming that's what it was, they'll have a contractor management system in place and it asks for specific things. They're just ticking a box. As long as you provide something that they can attach to that to say, yes, here's the evidence that we've met that requirement. You could put a picture of your put a picture of your brand new mower and they wouldn't know any different.
Yeah. So, often if you try and have the discussion about this industry does not require licensing or registration, they come back with, we need it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of people aren't aware of the privacy laws. And under privacy laws, they can't actually keep a record of your driver's license. So something that a lot of people aren't aware of. And it's different when it's a license that's required for work, or you might have a high-risk work license. So you're operating an elevated work platform. They can keep a copy of that, but not your driver's license because it has so many personal details on there.
Yep, that's something to be aware of.
Yep.
So a couple of other ones I've had come up which are less comedic but still interesting, and it shows a level of ignorance across the board. In terms of requirements, if a business or a governing body gets a little bit scared, they start asking for extra documentation. So I've had a SWIMS document, and then I talked about bringing in a new tool that they considered to be high risk. Already had a SWIMS document in place, and they're like, we need a specific SWIMS document for that tool.
Yeah, and I have heard that. Look, it is something that can be done, but again, we've got to look at the big picture and go, well, it's a risk assessment, and that the whole idea of a SWIMS is to have everything in there. So you could always add it in and say, look, can you explain to me why? But again, it comes down to that conversation with whoever you're trying to get a contract with, or you already have a contract with, to maintain that agreement. Unfortunately, they can ask for that. But to save yourself some dollars and some heartache, it's always good just to push back with a conversation and say, well, what's the difference? Can you explain to me the difference between adding it to my current SWIMS or risk assessment and having a second one?
The other one that I've seen come up, similar in nature, but also evidence of a lack of understanding, is SWIMS document covers most things, and sometimes they ask for SWIMS and JSA because they don't understand the difference.
Yeah.
So they might say, you need a SWIMS document for you to have a contract with us, but you need a JSA for every day that you're on site. So the new JSA gets filled out every day.
Yeah. And I have heard a few contractors come through with that as well. And I'll always push back and say, have a conversation with them and let them know that your work health and safety consultant has made it clear that a SWIMS and a JSA are the same thing. In fact, JSA is an outdated term that's no longer in the legislation.
Yep. The other one that came up for me, if we're talking about different levels of contractual service, so you go for a real estate job, and they might ask you for they probably don't even ask for a SWIMS document most of the time, but then you go and you work for a company that is subcontracting through the real estate company, and then they go, we want a JSA or a SWIMS document. And then they might have several different levels of contractors working on site, and they get confused and they go, hang on a minute, your SWIMS document is not enough. You need a work health safety policy.
Yeah, and look, to be honest, everybody in that chain, that contract chain, technically should have their own work health and safety management system documentation. However, if they are a flexible organisation, they could actually potentially say, "Hey, we want you to read and sign to say you've understood our work health and safety policy." Particularly if you're only coming in to do, the nature strip outside of a block of industrial units or something like that.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of cases where to even get the contract, they're asking for a work health and safety or occupational health and safety, I should clarify. In Victoria, they still use OHS.
Yep.
The rest of the country's work health and safety. A lot of places will require you to have a work health and safety policy as a minimum to get the contract.
Yep.
And then you can build up from there with a whole suite of procedures which talk about how you can apply what's in your work health and safety policy.
Yeah, so it sounds a lot more daunting when you go from SWIMS document to a policy, a company policy.
Yeah, and look, it can be, and if you don't have experience with policies and procedures, and putting your head into work health and safety legislation, so the Act and the regulations, if you're not familiar with that, it can be quite daunting.
Yeah,
and that's, I guess, where I've been able to provide value for the industry is bringing that experience, and it is a bit of a step up. However, it's kind of horse in the cart. So technically, you should have a work health and safety policy, and then underneath that, you would have something like a work health and safety risk management procedure, which says you're going to conduct a risk assessment or a SWIMS.
Yeah.
So again, it comes down to where you're at in your journey with your business, and again, it's about reaching out. We've got this amazing network with the two lawn mowing contractor groups, and even broader, looking at the landscaping groups and the pressure cleaning group.
Yep.
You've got all these people. We can all lean on each other, and if you're not sure and you don't have a mate that can help you out, absolutely give me a bell. And that's what I do. I write these. I've got them ready to go, so that, because I know how rushed we sometimes feel when we're putting in our tenders, or when we're under the pump from our person that we're working for, our client. They're going, well, you need this document or you can't come out tomorrow. So there've been times where I've had contractors call me or message me the night before and go, look, I really need this tomorrow, or I can't get out on the job.
Yep.
And I've done what I can to try and get that ready by the next morning for them.
Efficiency is the thing that rules a business and the decisions you make as a small business owner. Right Mowers give you the options in their product lineup to match efficiency with size, fuel usage, and the type of jobs you want to target, from catching to mulching or side discharge, from roadside verges to acreages, and manicured lawns to 6 feet tall and super long. I've been using the Right Stander I 42-inch with a Catch Pro for manicured areas, and the Stander ZK61 to maximise productivity for large open acreage mowing. If you need to replace your push mower, try the 32-inch Stander B. If you have more open access to residential properties, there's a 42 through 48-inch option that suits you. And if you want to enter the acreage market, the 52, 61 and 72-inch machines have choices in engine size and model type to suit the work you want it to do. Right Standards go the distance, saving you time and money season after season.
At the risk of doing you out of work, there are a lot of times where a contractor who hasn't done one before can go on the internet, copy paste, put their logo on the top of a SWIMS document and modify it or even a lot of the times not even modify it, submit it, get it checked off. Yeah,
and that's what I was saying before about those contractor management systems. Some of them may not be checked. They might just be, the AI might be just looking for the word swims.
Yeah.
And go, okay, there's the swims in there. But a lot of the better organisations out there will actually have someone going through and reviewing that documentation. Somebody like myself, and that's where you might get caught out. So, hey, if you can find something that works, and you're confident that it's going to keep you out of jail and out of those hefty fines, if something goes wrong, then fill your boots. But the number of times I've had people try that and come back to me and go, "Oh, I tried this, but they're not accepting it.
Yep.
Can you do one up for me?" And I've got them ready to go. So that's the beautiful thing.
Now, in our industry, we have a very diverse range of people, from somebody who won't be able to write their own name through to somebody like yourself who understands this legislation back to front.
Yep.
So it really is a case of case by case and who needs help, and some people don't need help. But I'm quite happy to write a swims document. I could probably write a full policy if I really pushed myself, but I'd be much happier to come to you and say, "Hey, Steve, I've got to do this. Let's make sure it dots all the I's and crosses all the T's."
Yeah, and look, there are people out in this industry and the other industries that I service, who, like you, Gary, they do have that experience and that confidence to go and do that. And look, good on them. I think that's great. And every now and then I get one of those people who'll come and say, "Can I get you to just look over it for me and tell me if it looks all right?"
Yep.
Or they might have just a quick question, and I'm always happy to take those. I spent 3 years in the lawn mowing industry. I've got, like you said, I've made a lot of friends, and I'm always happy for people to just shoot me a quick question. I'm not going to charge an exorbitant fee. I'm just going to go, "Okay, yeah, I'll answer your question." Like it's good. It's good for the industry, and that's why I've continued to do this, because like you say, there's just such a broad spectrum of people, and some people just it's never been something they've ever had to deal with, and as their business grows, it's something they've been required, and they just feel out of their depth, or they just don't have the time. I'm happy to give free advice.
So between the copy and paste cowboys and the office jockeys, you find there's a bit of mismatch in what the documents require. And if it's a cowboy that is good at copy and paste, they might take a document off the internet and then copy and paste and not really understand what the document requirements are, not understand how to do a proper risk assessment. So the risk there is that either their document gets rejected, or if something goes wrong and it goes into court, then they look like a fool, because that's what they are, right? Yeah. At the other end, you've got the desk jockey who's never been on a work site, never used a lawnmower. They don't actually understand what the real risks are. And I've seen this countless times where you look at it and you go, "There's no steering wheel on my lawnmower."
Yeah. And that's the thing, and I'm not trying to sell myself here, but I do have that experience, and this all actually kicked off when I first joined LMCA, and there were a group of guys that were saying that they needed a swims, something that was sort of sets an industry standard that a whole bunch of them could use. I ended up with 13 guys, and we had a couple of meetings, and it was great for me because I learned going into a new industry. I learned about a lot about how to operate within the industry, but the trade-off was that I was able to provide at a really cheap cost, split across 13 people. I think it worked out at like $30 a person at that stage, because it was a few years ago. And to provide this document, and that sort of kicked it off. And I went, if there's 13 people that need it, and there's thousands of people in this industry, how many other people are going to need this?
I think there's about 8,000 people in LMCA, and the other group has probably 5,000 people in it, I think. So there's 20,000 plus people in the industry at the moment, and you could probably draw, say, even 5 to 20% of those people and go, they're at some stage going to need at least a swims document.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, and that's probably my biggest piece of work is is getting swims to people so they can get their contracts. But I guess what you were saying before, just to touch on that thing about ending up in court if something goes wrong. One of the key things about your swims and what's in your policies and procedures is understanding what's in them. Yeah. And there's no point having a swims that you've grabbed off the internet if you're not actually going to do what it says that you're going to be doing.
Yep.
So if you're at risk of reopening the guard or no guard discussion, if you've got on there that you're going to have guards on your whippersnippers to prevent an injury, not that it would necessarily cause significant injury, but combined with wearing PPE, you've got a good chance of preventing an injury. If you say in there that that's what you're going to do, and then you have somebody runs over, a razor blade or something in the grass, and it goes into someone's leg, they're wearing shorts and they've got no guard on, and it gets flicked straight into their leg. What's going to happen is in court, they're going to say, well, why didn't you have the PPE that you said you were going to wear, and why didn't you have the guard that you said was going to be fitted? Yeah. So that's just a very basic example. And that's the key thing is for people who want to go out and do their own, just make sure that you are actually doing what it says that you're going to do in that swims.
Yeah. Now, between you and I, this is a topic that is quite interesting. Your experience from a work health safety employee, that's been your job. And from my perspective, before I started in this industry, I was a case manager for workers' compensation claims. Yep. Now, most of the time, if somebody has a cut or a broken bone, it's considered a fairly low risk injury. They go to the doctor, they report it to workers' compensation, to the insurance company. Work cover will see it, but most of the time work cover won't investigate it. Yep. So I'm guessing you would know of situations that do get escalated for a work cover investigation and then court hearing.
Yeah, and again, it comes down to how significant it is. So there are certain types of incidents that need to be reported to Safe Work or whatever the regulator is in state or territory. And we're looking at serious lacerations or amputations. Just thinking with some of the equipment that we do work with, it's pretty easy to lose a finger or worse. And in those cases, they not only do they need to, if it's their worker, need to report it for their insurer for their workers' comp, but it also needs to be reported to their regulator. And in those instances, that's where they are going to very likely come out and have a look at what you're doing and what documentation you've got in place.
Yeah.
When they notice that things aren't right, that's when they'll take it to court for breach of the work health and safety legislation.
Yeah. So I think in New South Wales, it's iCare now rather than work cover.
Yeah.
Handles most of it. But yeah, I've seen this escalate to those levels when it's, say, a builder falling off a roof, or like you say, there's, a amputation that's significant. Even a minor amputation, like often a fingertip will have just the tip of the finger amputated. They might still have most of their nail bared. Often that won't even get escalated.
No, that's right. And again, it comes down to what has to be notified. But if you don't notify and then they find out, then it's big fines for that as well. So what I recommend is that you have an incident management procedure and a return to work or injury management procedure as well, to talk about how you identify what needs to be reported, how to report it, and then how to manage those injuries. The place you find out what needs to be reported, it's in the work health and safety laws, and also on your state or territory regulator's website. They'll actually have how to report and what needs to be reported. Yeah.
And this also goes to whether you need insurance as a employer. Often if you're running solo, and you don't have a company, then you won't even have a workers' compensation policy.
Yeah, that's right. So as a sole trader or partner business, you're not actually considered a worker. So if you've got partners in a business, you are not considered to be workers. Whereas if you go to a company and you're a director, then you're considered to be a worker. So
Correct.
that's why for most of the solo operators out there, you don't have workers' comp. And what will happen is you might go for a contract and they'll say, "Oh, we need your workers' comp to prove that you're covered."
Yeah.
And you got to push back and say, "Hey, I'm a sole trader and I legally can't have one, but what you can do is have personal injury insurance."
Yeah.
And that's one that recently come up. Would have been last week. Someone was asking me about it. One of the people that I've been friends with in LMCA for a while, and he just asking some free advice. And I said to him, "Look, it's a great idea to have it because if something goes wrong, sole trader, that's your only source of income. If you don't have any staff working for you, then you really need to have some sort of coverage. Have a chat with your insurance broker, and they'll hook you up."
Now, again, coming back to legislation and worksite requirements, often you will have a sole trader who will have 2 or 3 employees. They'll put in for a contract on a commercial site. They will have a workers' comp policy that covers their employees, but they, as the owner of the business, even though they're a sole trader, will not be covered by that workers' comp policy. Now, if they're on that work site and they injure themselves, they're not covered by workers' comp, and the lead contractor on the site or the owner of the site becomes liable for a work injury.
Yeah, and that's depending on which state or territory, and depends on how that works too. So
Yes.
And again, this is where the recent case was that that this contractor had subcontractors, and he had his own personal injury insurance.
Yep.
He was covered, but they were saying, "Look, we don't want to be liable. We don't want to have to make a payout under our insurance.
Yeah.
So for you to be able to work for us, you need to get all your subbies to go and get that insurance for themselves," because they were all sole traders working solo as well.
Yeah. I've come across this numerous times. When I started my business, I started as a family trust with a company, and the company covers myself under workers' compensation. So, and any employees. But I did have a situation where I had a subcontractor under me, and it was a case of going, all right, if that subcontractor has an injury, then the buck stops with me and my workers' compensation. Even though they're not my employee, they are considered an employee for work injury purposes.
Yeah. So, and again, under Work Health and Safety, the Work Health and Safety Act talks about, it uses the term worker, and that's anybody who's doing any work for you. So whether it's a volunteer, work experience person, even your contractors. So
Yep.
You share a duty under Work Health and Safety with that contractor. So that between the two of you, you've got to have that conversation and say, right, what insurance have we got? What work health and safety documentation have we got between us that will cover everything?
Now, when I was in this is 15 years ago, so I'm not going to quote numbers or the legislation here, but there was a allowance for a worker that was new and had done less than $7,500 in 1 year of paid work, that they could be covered under the scheme where they weren't actually considered a worker.
Yeah. So as far as workers' comp goes, once you've brought somebody on, you need to go to your local state or territory workers' comp regulator.
Yep.
And they'll be able to tell you. So each jurisdiction is going to be different, but they'll always ask you, a whole heap of questions, well, not a whole heap, but enough to determine, like what you've said. So they'll ask for things like, how long have they worked for you or in the industry? What are their qualifications? And how much are they earning? That's probably the main thing they want to know is how much they're earning.
Yeah.
And so when you bring on a casual, which was when I started out Chromo, shortly after I started, I brought a casual on, and unfortunately I was above that threshold and had to pay to have a workers' comp policy. But yeah, you're right. There is a threshold where you may not need to have a policy, and they'll be covered under whatever the government's arrangement is.
I've had to deal with a claim in this situation, and obviously I'm restricted from providing confidential information about that claim. But in that situation, somebody who was considered on the uninsured scheme was then required to pay for a policy to cover that worker who injured themselves. So,
interesting.
Yeah, so they're covered.
Yeah.
But at the moment an injury happens and they are deemed to be a worker, then they are now deemed to be required to pay workers' comp.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, look, I'm not familiar with those sort of arrangements, but typically most people will be above the threshold anyway. The amount of work that we, especially during the growing season.
Yeah. Well, I think in the situation where you've never had a worker before, you've put on a casual, they don't last 2 weeks and you say goodbye, then you're probably not got anything to worry about. But if they injure themselves in that 2 weeks, guess what? They got the rights to a workers' comp policy.
Yes,
workers' comp claim.
Yeah. Yep, and under work health and safety, you do have an obligation to keep them safe. So, and that's like you said, the buck stops with you as the employer. You have to make sure that you're looking after them, and if they're injured, while in your care. Example, when I've got my first stander, and I was doing training on that stander with my casual staff member, they had an injury during training. And had to put in a claim, bruising to the bone, and they were off for a while.
That's hard.
But the great, apart from it being difficult, having to go out and work solo again, the benefit of it was that because I had a policy, then a percentage of their wages was actually covered by that insurance policy. So I wasn't out of pocket. At the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think it's a large percentage of their wages covered for that. So it's
I think it's 95% from memory.
Yeah, I would imagine that's probably going to be the case across the country, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yeah, so in New South Wales, it's 95%.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Aussie Lawn Stars. Please remember to rate and review the show on the Apple Podcasts app or the player you use. Exciting new shows are released every Monday. Make sure you follow or subscribe to hear the next episode.